Greetings from Hamburg, Germany. My name is Casey Randazzo, and I'm presenting a study I conducted alongside Dr. Tafik Amari called If Someone Downvoted My Post, That'd Be the End of the World, Designing Safer Online Spaces for Trauma Survivors. Have you ever struggled to find the right words to describe an experience or a feeling? Well, that might be because the words just don't exist, especially if you're trying to describe a marginalized experience. This can feel like you're in a maze of language and unable to communicate because the words needed are just missing from dictionaries or are not part of common language. Ardner refers to this phenomenon as muted group theory, which explains how marginalized individuals lack the words to describe their experiences because language is biased to dominant groups. One example is the term sexual harassment, which was coined by activists at Cornell University in 1975. Before then, people, most often women, didn't have a word to describe unwelcome sexual attention in the workplace. And it wasn't until 1986 that the Supreme Court added sexual harassment under the Civil Rights Act. Muted group theorists argue that having the words transforms sexual harassment from an individual problem to a societal issue. This is particularly concerning for trauma survivors, which are estimated to be 70% of the adult population globally, as not having the words to disclose to a trusted friend or a health professional can severely impact a survivor's mental health and well-being. To explore this area, we built a theoretical framework which explains how trauma survivors find the words to disclose by listening to the narratives of their peers, assess their disclosure efficacy, which is their confidence in their ability to disclose, looks at the role of platform design in this process, and the potential disclosure outcomes and user behaviors. And after reviewing this literature, we found two gaps that needed further investigation. First, the majority of disclosure studies concentrate on individuals who name their trauma or know their diagnosis, which inadvertently leaves out the perspectives of muted groups. And second, we're missing a process model that visualizes these complex and often unseen socio-technical interactions between trauma survivors and social media platforms. To fill these gaps, we asked the following research questions. What are the experiences of muted trauma survivors who are part of online spaces where trauma narratives are commonplace? And how does the platform design influence the disclosure efficacy of muted trauma survivors? To answer these questions, we pulled from a subset of 29 in-depth interviews with survivors that describe themselves as muted and analyzed that data using iterative and emergent theory approaches. Our findings reveal three effects, which we visualize using a spinning top metaphor. If you've ever played with a spinning top, then you know it's a toy that remains dormant until you pick it up and activate it. Similarly, encountering a narrative online that mirrors one's own trauma initiates an activation effect. This effect describes a user feeling an emotional response to online content. And for most of our participants, activation was aided by algorithmic systems, which helped some find the words to disclose their trauma and eventually get support, and others obfuscated their data in resistance to those algorithms. And if you've played with a spinning top before, then you know that the force behind the initial push determines if it spins or if it falls. And likewise, the decision to disclose for muted groups, whether that disclosure takes place online or offline, can be influenced by the design of a platform. So this stage yielded two effects. One you just saw, that's the toppling effect, which describes how platform design can contribute to a weakening of disclosure efficacy, and a steadying effect, which is how design contributes to the strengthening of disclosure efficacy. And now we'll get into some examples of those. So Mila, one of our participants, experienced an activation effect when she first heard the term narcissistic abuse in a TikTok video. Mila said, It was almost like the words were coming out of my mouth, but it was somebody else. It helped me explain what was happening to my parents and my brothers when I needed to get out. Mila, along with other survivors in the sample, perceives TikTok's algorithm to afford transportation to new neighborhoods of information. This perceived affordance stems from research on narrative transportation, which is often used to describe readers that are immersed in books. We adapt this idea to social media platforms by conceptualizing platform design, which in Mila's case is algorithmic content recommendations, as the mode of transportation. This activation stage led users to find the words, and now that they have them, they need to decide if they're going to disclose. In this quote that you see here, Diane, who is a survivor of intimate partner violence, is discussing Facebook's anonymity design in their Facebook groups, which contributed to a toppling effect for Diane, discouraging her from disclosing and accessing help in an online support group. Diane explains, the administrator still knows it's you. It's going to sound a little paranoid, but I don't know who knows my ex. I don't want him ever finding out. I never went to the police, and I don't want to ever come back to me. In this quote, Diane states that the administrator still knows it's you, revealing that Facebook affords confidentiality and not anonymity, which can be dangerous and weakens Diane's disclosure efficacy. Findings also reveal how platforms can contribute to a steadying effect. For instance, a lot of our users that participate in this study, like Eleanor, describe themselves as lurkers. But still, although they were lurkers, they still felt a connection to the community, which challenges current notions on the design of preventing lurkers and getting people to engage more. For most of our participants, lurking was a shield of protection. So in this example, Eleanor says, I often get validation on my own issues from the other comments. Even if the original person isn't in a place to receive that help, it still helps me. This quote suggests that Eleanor perceives the platform to afford her with indirect feedback, which differs from direct feedback in that it describes users internalizing downvotes or replies to someone else's posts. The study also outlines how different affordances, like the ones I just mentioned, indirect feedback, transportability, and others, anonymity, direct feedback, and content persistence, point to the different spinning effects. Findings also reveal the limitations of handing trauma care tools to communities. For instance, Dorothy introduced us to Reddit Cares, a feature that allows Redditors to flag users that appear to be experiencing mental distress. To prompt Reddit Cares, a user has to flag a post as a suicide risk. This will trigger Reddit Cares to send a message containing mental health resources to the post creator. Dorothy explains, if people are doing it to you a bunch, you could just disable Reddit Cares. But why make it a feature that you can disable? Why not punish the people abusing it? In this example, individuals are using Reddit Cares as a social tactic to prank, harass, or retaliate against other users, which decreases the perceived value of this trauma care tool. Our findings also demonstrate how certain communities can act as alternative safe spaces. Unfortunately, for most survivors in the sample, they still haven't disclosed their trauma to friends, family, or healthcare professionals and don't feel confident in their ability to. And this is all due to fear of attaching the trauma to their identities. We found that even the name of an online support group bared so much weight that they didn't want to enter this digital space. But they did find support and resources in trauma adjacent groups. For example, our participants were very active, daily visiting in true crime communities. They found that these alternative safe spaces bared the weight of identity-based stigma and allowed them to tiptoe up to trauma narratives from a safe distance. Findings also challenge the understanding of filter bubbles. Our data suggests that filtering algorithms benefit some muted trauma survivors, helping them to challenge societal filters that institutions can implement. Recall Mila's description of her experience on TikTok. Her For You page recommended videos that challenged common misconceptions about intimate partner violence, transporting Mila to narratives that reflect her experiences. This suggests that algorithmically generated filter bubbles can help muted groups pop societal filters. In summary, our study sheds light on how mutedness hinders recovery from trauma. We present the spinning top model to identify the role of design in unmuting. We define the affordances associated with the model, conceptualize alternative safe spaces for stigmatized identities, and challenge notions on filter bubbles for muted groups, along with providing design recommendations to make online spaces safer for trauma survivors. Thank you for listening, and please reach out if you have any questions.